Welcome back, everybody. So now that we listen to Miroslav and learn about Google Ads and have ambitious plans for ad campaigns, what we need to know is how to measure the performance of those, which is why we have Zorin back again with us to teach us about Google Analytics. Give it up, warm applause for Mr. Zorin.
Well, just one point. You can never measure Miroslav. He's basically very elusive in measurement. We've tried it for about 10, 12 years or something, but we never managed to do that. We can measure any kind of ad, but Miroslav is just out of our scope. What was presented at the beginning basically was how to measure success. And yesterday's lecture was about the basics, basically the implementation, the legal compliance, and everything else which revolves around Google Ads, Google Analytics, Facebook, and everything else. So until that basics are covered, you cannot do anything advanced, basically. So what is an advanced approach? What's basically, how do we manage any kind of advanced analytics? So does any of you have any kind of an advanced implementation? Or what you consider an advanced implementation? That's basically a good question. So an advanced implementation, let's try to sum it up basically, is an implementation which can easily give you an answer to a business question. That's an advanced implementation. A basic one is just plain metrics, plain dimensions. You can basically answer some simple questions like where do the users come from, which channel did they use to find your site, and so on and so on. And this is just basic understanding of what the acquisition regarding your site is doing, meaning where do you spend money, is it well spent, in some cases basically, but the standard implementation doesn't take care of the, let's say, more detailed, more advanced things. So let's keep the introduction. I'm basically just going to cover three main subjects for today. Google Analytics 4 is a, let's say, hot topic, not for everyone, it's for people who do this kind of work, let's say agencies, advertisers, and so on. And people's expectations, user expectations, have grown rapidly, basically, but also ability to measure has decreased rapidly. So these are two main things that are happening in the market currently. Where it's not currently, it's basically at least 2 years ago that some initial privacy concerns were addressed, and then afterwards, basically some additional expectation, especially in terms of, I definitely believe you heard that there is a lot of communication about AIs, machine learning, and things like that. Everyone's just like having a trumpet is using these keywords basically just to say that there are these smart machines that they can answer any kind of a question even without any data and so on and so on. But it's not really the case. If you have less data and if it's garbage data as before, you basically cannot be any smarter. No machine in the world can help you in this case. So the basic question is regarding expectation, meaning did we get there? Is there some kind of a crystal ball that can predict what your business result is going to be in the next, let's say, quarter or a year or 3 years or something like that? It's quite difficult. What we can predict is probably 7 days, 14 days, something like that. But anything outside of that time range is extremely difficult. On a high level, probably yes, but on a low level, granular level, almost impossible. We lack the sum of data, the quantity basically, especially for niches, industry niches. If we talk about food or maybe cars or something like that, it's much easier. But in this case, quite difficult. So we're going to do, let's say, 3 main cases. Once you engage with Google Analytics 4, it's basically a new version. It's going to substitute the existing one, and it's going to happen next year. So the question from yesterday was, when do we migrate to Google Analytics 4? You basically can do it as soon as possible. So it's not a question of should we wait till, let's say, 6 months once the old version is deprecated. No, you should do it as soon as possible. Just for having the ability to get as early as possible to year-over-year comparisons. That's basically the point of why you want to upgrade as soon as possible. But there is this kind of a hiccup. Basically, you need to align with compliance. So basically, cookie policy, privacy policy, data sharing, and everything else needs to be in check. Once this is done, then you can migrate to a new solution. It also applies to any other tool that you have on your site, even email marketing tools and things like that. So MailChimp is also in question, Klaviyo is also in question, any kind of US-based service basically is in question of further usage. So you need to comply with the existing European regulation, and once this is done, you can move on to something else. So in our case, we just make sure that we reduce the risk of sending any kind of personal data or multiple personal data points to a US server as much as possible. I mean, things can happen. So the differences between Universal Analytics and GA4, there are many differences. So basically comparing these two engines should be done on higher level. So can they perform the same function? So let me simplify, yes, they can. Is it easy to do it in one and the other tool? No, it's probably not, because there are not as many help articles, there are not as many experiences with the new tool, so it's going to be a problem with doing the same analysis, same methods, same tools and everything else inside Universal Analytics and GA4. It needs some time to get used to basically the whole practice. And I must say the interface sucks, basically. The new GA4 interface, so the new tool and everything else is extremely cumbersome, basically. It's slow, it has some UX errors still, but they are fixing it, basically. So let's say inside 3, 5, 6 months, everything will check out as expected. So some kind of feature parity or possibility to do analysis in Universal and in GA4 is probably going to be the same, even better, even better. For the reasons that we didn't mention it today, but on the yesterday's lecture, for the cookie policy, for modeling, behavior modeling, conversion modeling, and everything else. Because we can now just track only a subset of data, we cannot track everyone. Basically, that's the whole idea. So based on cases, we are going to show 3 main things, 3 main important things. So the things that are important inside the interface, which you need to do inside the administration. So the second part is what can you do with the implementation, so what needs to be taken care of. And the third part is the reporting part. So you don't use the standard reports at all, because they are not useful at all. There is a completely different user interface for reporting inside Google Analytics 4, which is definitely much more powerful than anything that you have ever seen inside Analytics. So, and we are going to go through some of these cases. So before we go to cases, let's build one. So you have some kind of a charter site, and these are the, let's say, main important events which are basically carried out on the site. So people are searching for something, booking for something, sending leads, viewing a boat or a product, and so on and so on. So the usual suspects, basically. Once we have this taken care of, so these are all of the interactions that the user can perform on the site, and we are sending all of this information back to Google Analytics. The same procedure applies to Universal Analytics and GA4. So it's basically the same thing. Then we get to enrichment, because sending events by themselves do not make any sense, because you cannot have granularity then. I mean, if someone rents a boat, you would probably like to know which kind of a boat it is. How long is the duration of the booking, and so on and so on. So additional information which describe a specific event. In this case, this is just for 2 specific events. So search availability, which is almost the same as in travel industry. It's basically the same. People start their, let's say, journey if they know when they can enjoy, let's say, a holiday, basically. So that's the first point of information that you want to access from a user. So if someone gets inside, let's say, a booking agency, and the first thing is, yeah, I want to go there, so the place, when, and how many people are going to, let's say, join. 2 kids, 1 kid, no kids, a pet, and so on and so on. So these are basically the most basic facts that you want to track in order to understand what the actual person is looking for. Then the second part, where you have much more detail, you can go in depth. That's the boat details, basically. When you look at a specific offer. So in this case, you can track even more. And all of these items are then used afterwards for 2 main functions. So the first one is reporting. I want to see trendings throughout time, what kind of a boat is in demand, what's not in demand, which is also really important. And then let's say the second part, I can build audiences. Based on these audiences, let's like boat type 1, 2, 3, whatever you want to call it. You can even go to categories like motorboats, yachts, catamarans, and so on and so on. So you can have high-level categories or low-level categories. It depends on what you want to report on and what you want to segment on, and then build audiences, basically. So when we say audiences, audiences are not 10 people. They need to be 1,000 people. They need to be big audiences, yeah. Because if it's a small audience, then there are other channels which are excellent at performing this kind of an effort. Email marketing, SMS marketing, whatever. Direct channels are much, much better at this than, let's say, Google Ads. Google Ads cannot do anything if it doesn't have at least 1,000 people inside a segment, inside a group. So that's the biggest difficulty with it. If you go too granular, it could be the case that no ad campaign is going to be active. Why? Because the segment is just too small, and then no activation is going to happen. For the technical part, and the business part, and the marketing part, so what's your, basically, role inside the process? If you don't know, or are not savvy, or do not have any kind of affinity for programming, or doing any kind of work on site itself, inside the code, then the only thing that you need to transfer for the developer is, I want to track this specific, let's say, interaction. This interaction needs to be enriched with these data points. And this is where you stop, basically. This is the part where you stop. Once they do this, let's say this is basically the way that the site communicates with tracking tools. So once this is done, then a person who does marketing, who is, as Miroslav said, MarTech person, which is marketing in technology, can perform the tracking activities and enrich data which is going to the endpoint. In this case, it can be either Google Ads, it can be Google Analytics, and so on. Using this kind of, let's say, data model or events schema, you can send all of this data not only to Google Analytics, you can send it to any kind of a platform which you have at your disposal. Meaning you can send it to your CRM, you can send it to Facebook, you can send it to Google Ads with almost the same function. You basically build audience and communicate with these specific audiences based on these specific data points. So without it, all these tools are pretty much stupid. There are some, let's say, good things about how sites are built, even though this is not the best way to perform it, where the URL, once you search for something, where the URL basically describes what you are searching for. So you won't need any additional development and things like that. So once a search page or search result page loads, you can just cherry pick all of these items from the URL. It just depends on how your site is built. So whenever someone performs a search, just take all of these items inside Google Analytics or Facebook or Ads and just push it inside. You'll be much smarter. You will not have this kind of a basic implementation, you will have a more advanced implementation. It's going to be smart. So working tips for this technical part is always work with some kind of a tag management solution. Tag management solution is basically what controls all of these marketing, statistical pixels, and everything else which loads on the site. What Miroslav has pointed out in the last lecture, basically the speed of site. So if you are tracking users with too many of these pixels and everything else, the load time is going to increase. If the load time is going to increase, then in that case, probably you're going to pay for higher CPCs, your SEO is going to suck, and everything else is just going to be out of balance. And that's the issue. One more addition to Miroslav's lecture, when you do these kinds of page speed tests and things like that, it's definitely not the same when you access page speed test and when you open it on your device. Why? Because on your device, a lot of these things which need to be loaded are cached. So these are preloaded from your device. Once Google is accessing basically your site, it's usually doing it with, it's simulating not a good connection. It's mostly 3G, mobile phone, something like that. And it depends where the server is. So if a server is, let's say, in South Africa and it's trying to access a server inside Croatia, there is going to be some latency in communicating between, let's say, the device, the server, and then back. So whenever you are testing any kind of page speed and things like that, this is the worst case scenario that's happening on your page. Not the best, not the average. This is the worst case that's happening. But the test that was performed today basically shows what the usual suspects are: images and JavaScript. So if you have big, large images on your mobile phones, they do not make any sense, basically. You are loading a bloated image, basically, which cannot be even shown on a mobile device. I mean, this level of detail is just not needed. So just take care of that when you're doing any kind of testing, basically. Whatever your existing implementation is on site, either ads, either analytics, you can reuse it. You can send the same events to Google Analytics 4 as you did with Google Analytics, the older version, but the question is, does it make sense or not? Were you satisfied with your old implementation? Does it offer any kind of a meaningful answer in a short period of time? If not, just do it from scratch. Delete everything. You actually do not need historical data from the old Google Analytics. Why? Because the measurements are different. The number of users is going to be completely different. The impact of ad blockers, the impact of analytics blocking and everything else is much higher now than it was before. So if you compare year over year, it's not going to be the same. It's apples and oranges, basically. So if someone has an idea, let's export the last 5 years of our analytics and everything else, so we have that prepared in some kind of a table. Just save your time for something better to do. Go out, drink coffee, or I don't know, do something. But with this kind of data, you won't be any smarter. So the configuration, the first one, there are a lot of new, let's say, novelties, concepts with Google Analytics 4. And it's not only Google Analytics 4, it's any kind of analytics tool. It's basically what you have as resolution identity or reporting identity. So that means, what do we consider a user? So in all Google Analytics, we have device-based identification. So that's like a cookie which is set on your device. So if you, let's say, have 4 devices, that means if you get on one particular site, Google Analytics will show 4 users, which is not a great idea to have, basically. And it's an issue because you can have inflation of users and so on and so on. The point with these 2 advanced, let's say, reporting identities is that it uses third-party information, like Google accounts and things like that, and then it can stitch these, it can stitch you in a good way, basically, so it can stitch you as a one person. And then it will show inside, basically, Google Analytics that only one user, but with multiple devices, visited the site. So that's what we call cross-device behavior, cross-device identity, tracking, and everything else. It makes sense to have it, but it doesn't mean that all of the users are going to be recognized. For some of these, it's going to be not set. Why? Because they don't have a Google account, because they do not allow Google tracking or any kind of tracking to be performed on the site. So, but it's definitely an advancement, basically, in let's say, in regards to what privacy is saying and in regards to how users are usually behaving. I mean, out of all of you here, you probably have at least 2 devices ready. At least 2. I mean, the business computer, then the personal mobile phone, business mobile phone, and so on. So it's a highly complex thing of how people are using this. If you want to mimic, basically, the old Google Analytics, the only thing that you need to do is use this device-based. And it will basically use the client ID, the cookie ID, which is stored on your device, and this is going to be the representative of a user. If you want to do any kind of advanced reporting identity modeling, then in this case, either observed and blended is the choice. But you need to take care of the details in the implementation. The second part, what changes, is basically the conversion attribution inside Google Analytics. Before, let's say, the old Google Analytics had only one single attribution model available inside standard reports. When I say standard reports, you usually went to acquisition, source mediums, and then you said, this source medium gave us this number of, let's say, leads, and so on and so on. But how it reported all of this, it's basically last non-direct attribution model. So it will give everything to the last channel, last campaign, last source of traffic, which led to creating a lead. So any visit before, any session before, from any source will just be nullified. You will have one user, one session, and everything else is going to be recorded, but it will not have this kind of a conversion attributed inside. Google Analytics 4 has something else, has something much more advanced inside. It's basically an ad hoc conversion model which you can apply at will, and you can change conversion models. So all of the standard reports will show a different conversion model per demand. And there are, let's say, two types of conversion model, or let's say three, but two types is a more generic term in this case. One touch point and multi-touch point. One touch point is basically you give me the first channel that brought me the conversion or the last one, and multi-touch point give me everything. So the value is going to be assigned at how much you value each of the channels in the cycle. And it's much more appropriate if you think of that, let's say for how long do you think, how long does it take for a person to book a charter? On average. 5 days? 20 days? 90 days? Who knows? It's on average. Yeah, it can be, it depends on the market. It depends on the price of the boat. It depends on, is it a new customer to the whole charter business or a completely, I don't know, a veteran basically. So these types of behavior and these types of users basically perform it in a completely different way. So when we say that there are multiple ways a person can book, and in some cases, especially for new ones, for new users to the service, they usually take longer. I don't know, a month, because everyone needs to agree on what the dates are going to be, what kind of a boat they want to do, what kind of equipment, I don't know, everything that needs to be done prior to the booking part. So if you want to have the entire journey covered, then in this case, a new attribution model needs to be applied. And in this case, GA4 has these two great ones. So this is the linear one. So everyone inside the chain is basically valued at the same pace. And then the second part is data-driven. Data-driven meaning basically it's a black box. It's some kind of a machine learning algorithm which covers all of your conversion paths and then tells you the story of how they think the attribution needs to be applied. Data-driven, just to make sure, makes sense if you have at least hundreds of conversions during a month. If not, data-driven is basically just something nice to have, but it's usually not that good in terms of quality, in terms of what you can get back out of. Privacy controls. So that's probably the first thing that the person that opens up an analytics account needs to cover. So privacy controls needs to be checked first. Why? Because there are now regulations and laws inside the United States, Brazil, basically the whole of South America. European Union is heavily guarded with GDPR, e-privacy directive, and so on and so on. So the first thing that you want to take care of is this part here. So Google Signals data collection, turn it off if you want to be safe, basically. Because with Google Signals, that means that the Google Analytics account is going to start communicating with a third-party service, which is not a good thing to have, basically. It creates additional issues, questions, and so on. Granular location and device data collection. Do you actually need the information that the user came from a Samsung device or from an iPhone device or, let's say, Xiaomi device? If it's needed, leave it on. If it's not needed, just turn it off. For analytics people, it's not that important. It's more important for debugging the site, if the user interface is showing on all devices and so on and so on. But don't use Google Analytics as a reporting interface for user interface or user experience, basically, in terms of technical details. There are much better tools to perform this kind of a test than collect all of this information inside Google Analytics. Granular location. So, do you need a city? Is this something you want to report on, basically? Let's say some small city inside France is visiting your site. Is that information important for you or not? It usually is not, because it's too small of a target for you to take care of, basically. What we do in Google Ads, what you do in Facebook, what you do in any kind of advertising platform, you usually do a region or a 5-kilometer radius when you have a big city. But this kind of a thing is usually used using some additional reporting, basically. Where the sum of your users are, you're probably going to advertise there. And not just cherry picking some, I don't know, smaller cities inside the region, because it takes time, it takes money, and it's basically definitely hard to target. Let's say in Croatia, you cannot target on a city level. I mean, you can, but it's not that accurate. We, when connect to the internet, basically in Croatia, from Osijek, let's say, we are shown in analytics like we are coming from Zagreb, Rijeka, Šibenik, and Slavonski Brod. And in some rare cases from Osijek. Why? Because the telecom is built like that, and we cannot change that fact. So granular location is not that accurate as it was before, and it's definitely not accurate in some countries. And yeah, that's basically it. And just don't forget to sign this user data collection acknowledgement, just to make sure what Google Analytics is basically collecting, how it uses data, how you can make sure that you can delete data, let's say, for a specific user, for a specific date range, and so on and so on. So make sure what Google Analytics can do for you in terms of privacy. This is really the boring part, basically, but it's the most dangerous part. So if you don't want to pay, I don't know, hefty fees or have issues with any kind of a measurement tool, make sure that you really cover the privacy perspective of the tools. Additional things, cross-domain tracking. Whoever has any kind of an external booking system, so it's basically not performed on the site itself, on the domain itself, but uses any kind of a third external payment service and so on and so on. When you do any kind of cross-domain tracking, so that's basically when you go from domain A to domain B, which usually happens, especially in e-commerce, in the travel, and so on. So what you need to take care of is this cross-domain part. Now it's hidden inside the interface, but you don't have to do anything on the site ever again. It can be done within Google Analytics admin. So these are just the links, and it's basically just saying what you need to take care of. Most of these things are covered in the docs side of Google Analytics. So whenever you want to implement something or have a question for Google Analytics, Google is your basically best friend. How to Google Analytics for, and then just write it around. Measure e-commerce, create conversions, measure events, and so on. Google has most of these things already covered. So it's not that big of a deal to find all of this information inside. Yeah. And then let's say, outside of this configuration part, probably the most important thing is the reporting. So once you start collecting events, once everything is configured, then you get to a part where you want to report on things. So when we say report on things, you usually open up the analytics and then have dashboards, some simple reporting like acquisition reporting, conversion reporting, and things like that. This does not exist inside Google Analytics anymore, at least not in the same way that it did before. So we are not going to try to recreate Google Analytics Universal inside GA4 because it definitely doesn't make sense. We are going to do something else, basically, and that's cover a whole new interface, which is called Explorations. It's a much, much better interface for reporting. Why? It can be customized. It's like customized reporting, basically. So I have a question, I will create a report which will answer this particular question. So I will start with something which is not that, let's say, usual to do, and it was always tricky inside Google Analytics to do it. It was this kind of a conversion funnel where you have steps inside the process. So start booking, enter some kind of information, next step, and so on and so on. And it was always a mess, basically, for creating because it was URL-based, and then you need to define all of these URLs. But the visualization was a bit off. That's the first part. And the second part, it's not that useful. You cannot do anything with it, basically, once you have the report. So in GA4, inside this interface, there is such, I would say beautiful, but it would probably be too much. It's a great interface to work with. You basically define your, let's say, funnel by steps, by the events that you defined in your measurement framework. So when we go to, let's say, this last part, yeah, this is the part, so the important events. They are usually taken care of in a linear procedure, let's say. So you are searching for a boat, you are viewing a boat, you are start the booking, you have entered payment information, and then you paid for something or entered some kind of a lead. Each of these things has a name, like this, search availability, boat details, and this is basically how you name the events, how you name the funnel stages, which is quite simple to do later on because you know the process. You defined it, and then it's just a matter of reporting it. So once you do that, just a sec, yeah, you just go define step 1, define step 2, define step 3, and so on and so on. And the great thing about it, it's not fixed. You can change the funnel steps whenever you want. You can even go deeper in the funnel, so it's not like view item list or a session start. No, I just want a session start, but from people who came to the site via Google paid search, let's say, or from Google display or something like that. So you can be very granular in terms of how you want to perform a funnel, so you can see where the issue is actually at. Once you do that, you have this kind of representation. So it's basically just a representation of sessions or users or whatever metric you want to choose. And then you see the drop rate for each of these steps. And there are two things. So the success rate is basically a silly thing to track. I mean, success rate is something that you see invoiced, something that you see on your email system. This is already tracked but in a different way. What you need to take care of is these red arrows below, which says how many people do you lose and do not perform the actual next step. So let's say from 100,000 people that came to your site, 68% didn't even make it to the next step. So that's the first column up there. And that's basically an issue. So when you do any kind of site optimization, funnel optimization, and so on, then you do the usual suspects, basically. So A, take care of the most important steps, because the most important users on this site, let's say, or in this process, is on the right side. So the worst thing that can happen, that a person just exits the whole process in the 5th step. That's the worst thing that can happen, because you have led them to a specific point, and then they just stopped. And that's basically an issue. So what you can do inside Google Analytics now is basically a very simple procedure. You just right-click on that segment, basically, on that particular user group, and create a segment and create an audience. So you can basically just push all of these users' information to Google Ads and automatically create some kind of a retargeting campaign which gets them back. So these are your most valuable abandoned users, basically, who you can probably get back at a lower price. Why at a lower price? Because the volume of these users is not that big, but the expected value of these users is extremely high. Why? Because they are extremely, extremely close. So this is just one of the things. So it's not only reporting, it's reporting and activating, which is extremely important for any kind of analytics tool. Because if activation is just in terms of having to write something inside the report, meaning we need to take care of the abandonment rate on step 6, then it actually sucks. The reporting part actually sucks. It's slow. Then you need to inform someone about it and so on and so on. And it takes time and it takes a lot of effort and so on. You can actually do it in a much simpler way. Get all of these people in a retargeting group, give them a specific, I don't know, discount code or whatever you can at this point, and then just push them through the cycle. You will spend some money, probably yes, but the opportunity cost for this particular group is quite fine, I would say. Yeah. So for funnel reporting, it's great. Now, funnel reporting does not mean that you only have to have one funnel on the site. You can have multiple funnels. User registration, motorboats, yacht boats, whatever you want, basically. It can be a specific segment. It can be a specific user interface which you need to take care of. Payment in specific, in great detail, basically. So whatever you can imagine of, you can create it based on the existing events. And that's why defining the events in the first place is so important, so that each of these reporting features can be used in a right way. Also, which is a nice thing, in the old Google Analytics, it was really tricky to do, basically. You can trend all of these steps step by step, basically. So you can see that in what usually it boils down to is that you have these kind of aggregate numbers. But these aggregate numbers are a result of daily basically activities. So if you want to pinpoint on a specific date, let's say, why this, let's say, abandonment rate is so high and so on and so on, it's usually because of these peaks, basically. And these peaks may mean that you had display campaigns on, that you had any kind of non-targeting advertising on, which led people to come to the site, but with no clear intent. Meaning that the whole system could be polluted, you need to rethink of how you do advertising, and so on. So a lot of things can be measured inside here. Next part is the machine learning part, basically. It's a nice thing to do, and it's a simple linear graph to start with. So what are we showing basically here? It's the total number of users which are interested in either Marina A or Marina B. So it's side-by-side comparison, basically, what you can have. This could be done in the old analytics. The thing that could not be done in the old analytics was anomalies. Because if you see this kind of a shade which goes through time, this is basically the expectation range. So analytics based on historic data expects how this line needs to go from the upper range and the lower range. And if it goes outside this kind of a range, you can get an alert in terms of high number of errors, high number of bookings, high number of demand for a specific boat, high number or low number, I mean lower than expected, throughout time. So when we talk about automation, reporting, anomaly reporting, prediction, and everything else, this is already done in the interface. So you don't have to, I don't know, data science your way out of it. This is already given to you, but there is a hiccup with this. If you have these kind of simple, let's say, low count events or low count users. So let's say you have this French city with one visitor alone, then the anomaly detection and expectation is not going to work on that. That's, I mean, with low sum of data, it's just not going to work. But with, I don't know, clear enough segments, it can definitely work and it can help. Second part is, let's say, getting audiences which are undecided. Meaning, give me a cross-segment of users who have both looked for a motorboat and a sailing boat, let's say. And then you see this crosshatch. These people are undecided. They either want this or that, but they're not quite sure about it. So you can do that. You can even do it by comparing two marinas or two, let's say, any kind of a thing which you can cross-device your way, cross-segment your ways through it. In this way, you basically create segments, but you create clear segments. I definitely know what I want. It's either left or right, but in the cross-section, it's people who are not really sure what they actually want. So you can also give them a specific ad. You can push them an email. You can push them whatever you want, but based on their undecisiveness. So you will not just push for motorboats, even if you have, let's say, capacity for that, but you will communicate both. So this is user personas, basically, in some way. And then we can have cohorts. This is mostly in medicine. This is used in medicine. So you basically have like two groups of people. They are treated with, I don't know, placebo and some kind of medicine. And then you see how they recuperate through time, let's say. In this case, we can see how many people return to the site, but they are interested in a specific area of your content. So either motorboats, either a specific marina, geography, location, and so on. So you can measure loyalty. You can measure reactivation, basically, based on this. In terms of how many people, when they come to a specific site or a page or from a specific campaign, how often do they come back to the site and, I don't know, get a new offer and so on and so on. This is usually the best approach to do with email marketing. So you can see that once you engage them with an email, how long do they need to take to get back to the site again? Do they purchase again? And so on and so on. This cohort analysis can be done even for conversions, basically. So it's not like revisit the site. I'm visiting again and again and again, but with conversion. So in how many hoops does a person basically convert? Do they need 1 week, 2 weeks, 3 weeks, and so on and so on? It depends on the longevity of the cycle. One of my favorite, especially for e-commerce, because in e-commerce, what we usually do is product views and product purchases. In this case, it's number of users for each of specific country and the revenue they accrued through time. Why is that important? To detect which of the products, this can definitely be applied to your case as well, which of the products is viewed, is highly in demand, but is not bought, is not booked. So you have an issue there. It can be a price issue. It can be an availability issue. It can be an image issue. It can be no video issue. It can be some specific detail, but it's extremely easy to detect in these scatter plot images, basically, when you see the relationship between two variables, basically. So this is definitely applicable. So a couple of reports, not mentioning any kind of source mediums, acquisition channels, and things like that, can be much more valuable than the entire standard segment, standard reporting section inside the old Google Analytics. It definitely is. Why? Because it's customizable, and each of these reports can lead to immediate action. And that's why analytics is basically worthwhile. If it's not, it doesn't make sense. And so for the takeaways for today, and if you have any questions later on. So the first party reports are useful if given additional context. So these are the custom dimensions. These are the parameters. This is how you describe any interaction which happens on the site. Without it, analytics is just plain stupid. It cannot understand what's going on the site. You will not understand what's going on the site in detail. So if you don't apply additional data points, it will not make sense. Usual cases, both for Universal Analytics and GA4 stay the same. Behavior patterns, behavior modeling, see what's in demand, what's sold, what's brought you to the lead. It can be recreated inside Google Analytics 4. So you don't have to wait for a new functionality to appear. And much more important for practitioners or for people who like to see data in any kind of way, or their job is to analyze demand or sales or things like that, explore user interface inside Google Analytics and Data Studio, which is now called Looker. In this case, it's much, much better than doing any kind of work inside the standard reporting features. And that's basically it. Thank you. So if you have questions, I have a lot of questions about Google Analytics. I mean, there are a lot of things that need to be fixed inside. But it's definitely taken me a lot of time to understand how it's working. That's A. And the bad thing is basically that once you understand it, they change it. Then you need to understand it again. But the point is, the best way to proceed it is just to start using it without any additional hassle. Learn the interface and basically just build the measurement framework from the ground up to be more useful in terms of reporting and audience creation. That's what I suggest. Yeah, questions, please. If you have any, if not, it's not lunch yet. So one more lecture. Okay, that's it. Thanks.